And so I'm really glad that we have Jisang you here to sort of round out the session from Amy's talk about engaging folks at the local level and how to sort of build out stories and build out acceptance of new and testing of new practices at that local scale and building up from there. We have Jisang to talk about kind of the federal perspective and what federal management and policy making, how that can play a role. So he's an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Kansas State University. He's been working on various research projects focusing on agricultural production economics and risk management policies. And he's been published in leading agricultural economics and multidisciplinary journals, such as the American Journal of Ag Economics, Nature Communications, Food Policy, European Review of Agricultural Economics, and Journal of Ag and Resource Economics. So please help me welcome Jisang to the podium. Thank you.
That's fine. No worries. All right. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you very much for having me. So as Robin described, my research area is within ag policy, production, crop insurance, and I'm gonna just share a couple of thoughts. So this will be a little bit different. I'm not gonna point out to a single study. This is more about the big picture questions and pointers and where we go from here. I think my talk can be summarized in these three questions. One is, how does a crop insurance in general affect the production decisions? And here I think the interest would be the conservation practices, and particularly on the water-related issues. And then the second question is, how does the farm policy or policies in general counteract across programs and also influence the production decisions? And finally, I think this is more interesting. Moving forward, is how does the Open ET or related innovations affect designing policies, and how does the producers will react to that? Right? All right, so crop insurance. I don't think all of the folks in the room is familiar with how the program works, but I'm not going to bore you with the details too much. A couple of pointers. One is that the premiums and subsidies and rules are set by the government risk management agency and the FCIC. That's the big difference compared to car insurance, life insurance, your daily other insurance products. And the second thing is also because it's run by government, it's a part of the Farm Bill program. Premiums are subsidized, so that's a core feature. But also, there's a lot of a private party, which is the private insurance companies and agents are delivering the products to the individual growers. So two popular crop insurance products. One is yield and the other is revenue. Those are the most common ones, and I'm going to talk about the other one that we call index insurance or non-traditional crop insurance product, which is again related to today's discussion. So this will be, I'm going to relate back to Dwayne's talk. I was told not to move away from the microphone, but
it's a small enough room, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fine. So that $5.95 guarantee, that's the projected price. So that's how that price is entering to the crop insurance. So that's the way the payout's being determined. So the yield one, obviously, if your yields go down to the guarantee, you get paid. That's simple. For the revenue one, your yield and the harvest price matters. Again, that projected price, that's the price guarantee in the beginning. Obviously, revenue protection covers more compared to yield because it captures both yield and the price variability. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute. So what the growers will do, growers are choosing either first, whether they want to be insured or not. And then they choose either they go for yield or revenue, and then they choose the coverage level, so that how much of the guarantee. APH is your historical average. RMA will kind of discuss with you in terms of what that should be. And then the other thing is the premium. That's the how much the farms are paying. Obviously, that's subsidized by the federal government, but again, growers need to pay something, right? Those are a function of your choice. And also how risky your production is, and also the practice, which is irrigated versus non-irrigated. That's my kind of segue to the water-related issue here. So both those yield and revenue, you can insure as a irrigated versus non-irrigated. There's some difference between those two, and I think that's kind of related to how the crop insurance gonna influence your production decision. And then also there's in between. That's a limited irrigation provision. It's not well received yet. It's not that popular, but it's related to the Sheridan Lima that Dwayne mentioned. So that's designed for the places like that where the groundwater use is somewhat limited. And the second one I think I want to point out is there's an index insurance product that's based on rainfall. Again, that's related to the water issues. Annual forage, I'm not going to talk about it, but those are quite similar programs. Why I'm pointing these two out? Because again, these are related to your production decision. So ensuring as the irrigated practices for the common yield and revenue insurances. So they can choose to insure as non-irrigated and irrigated, and the big difference is where the premium comes in. So I'm picking up this Sheridan County. Again, that's where the Sheridan Lima is. So I just pick up some benchmark yield. That's 120 bushel per acre. RMA has a nice tool. You can plug and play the yield and how much you're trying to insure, and then it will spit out how much as a grower need to pay. So you see the big difference here, irrigated versus non-irrigated. By the way, this is for corn. Irrigated, you don't have to pay as much as non-irrigated. So that's a big difference in terms of the producer, in terms of how profitable they will be even with the insurance premium that they need to pay. And then of course you're gonna get paid based on how your yield will look like and the price will look like. So 75% benchmark revenue protection, that's the most common one I think in general. Again, that's the numbers I'm pulling up. But here's the caveat. The caveat is for irrigated practices, producers need to maintain their irrigation requirement. That's based on their historical water use. So if you reduce that, even if you're doing anything technologically advanced or efficient, as of now, it's not going to be considered as irrigated. So you're not meeting the requirement. So there is some element to this policy influencing the production or practice decision. So again, I'm going to come back to this later part of this talk, but just keep in mind. The other one is this index insurance product. So this is for forage producers. This is about how much of rainfall they're getting. And it's a little bit complicated, but in nutshell, it's based on rainfall. Producers making a choice in terms of which month interval they're going to insure. Again, this is also the federal program, highly subsidized as well. But the reason I'm bringing this up is I think there is some potential that OpenET can step in the space of index insurance. Gaining a lot of popularity here because again, there's lots of pasture and forage land out there, and it's quite a useful tool for the producers. So it's been it started in 2007-8 and then gradually expanded to the whole U.S. So now it's available everywhere. So if you are a forage producer or livestock owner who has any economic interest or stake on the forage, you are eligible. You can participate. Okay. So basis risk. So we, as an economist or as a insurance researcher, it's a key term when we think about index insurance. So one thing is that unlike the yield and revenue protection determined by your yield, individual yield, the PRF or index insurance is based on index. So that's the rainfall indices. It's about the area. It's about the index. It's not exactly same as your individual outcomes. So there is a basis risk in terms of there's a gap between the actual rainfall in the site versus grid, and also the rainfall versus the forage growth. So there's some gap. It's not perfectly explaining your individual outcomes, but again, it has advantage in a way that the indexes are out there. It's easy to obtain compared to individual yield. There's a history out there. Rate making is easy. You have a data to fit and have an actually sound rate to be built in. So that's the advantage. But again, I think I'm going to point back to this when we talk about OpenET and related technologies. So now the key part, and relate to my own research and where I think the research in ag econ and ag policy analysis should go from here. So first thing I want to point out is incentives do matter, right? So Dwayne also pointed out, and Amy does as well, producer react to prices and budget and the profitability. Of course, riskiness matter too, and then the farm program comes in a way that it alters or affects the incentive to what they want to produce or how they want to produce, right? So crop insurance does change the guarantee, but also it also changes the expected return because it's also subsidized, and it does influence what they've been growing and where. Conservation programs. So I'm this is not explicitly listed as my title, but if you think about the conservation reserve programs or other EQIP or CSP, those also matter because that's a payment to the farmers conditional on the practices or conditional on not producing or not using the land. So a couple of studies I want to mention. So one of it's my own. It's about the production effects of crop insurance. So I'm looking at the crop insurance policy change in terms of it became cheaper. It has more subsidy going in and become more widely available. At the same time, if I look at the crop acreage or which crops are planted where, that's been positively influenced by the availability of crop insurance and the subsidy. So again, there's a big thing in terms of this is a big program. There's a big stakes in it and change the risk profile and return for the producers. It changes in an extensive margin and thus water use, right? So if we see more people growing corn instead of CRP or forage, we have to expect that the water will be used more. And growing corn in some area that's not really as good as, let's say, Corn Belt, crop insurance does encourage that. Second thing is, again, now I talked about the overall production effect, but we also think about the input use and conservation practices. So what's happening in the field, right? So again, there's a long-lasting question, empirical question, and theoretical question in ag econ space in terms of does insurance encourage what we call moral hazard behavior? That means reducing input to get more insurance payout. So far, there's no consensus, or even the consensus is more about there's not much of that effect, at least within the federal crop insurance space. It's well designed in a way that it's monitored well. Your adjusters comes in and check what you do. So in terms of that, it doesn't really affect that much in terms of whether we encourage folks to do more risky practices or reduce nitrogen. So that's not been, I don't think that's the case. So that means, does crop insurance encourage less input? I don't think so. But also, another thing we need to think about is, again, irrigation. And I'm going back to my point on irrigated practices. So again, it's cheaper to be insured as irrigated, but also you have to maintain the water use. So in that context, at least within that context, crop insurance is not encouraging water conservation, right? So even if you want to conserve it, because going back to dry land is expensive to buy crop insurance, so you probably want to just stick with irrigation and use the full amount. And then what about other conservation practices like no-till or cover crop? There's some papers finding that there's some disincentive to do so, but magnitude is kind of small. So that's a growing area. We need more empirical evidence. That's going forward with the future research agenda. But at least what we're seeing here is crop insurance is not a tool for promoting conservation, at least for now. And then final thing I want to mention within this segment is that the programs do conflict in some sense, because crop insurance is a safety net program. It's a risk management program. It's not conservation program. So this is one example. Again, one of my recent study find that crop insurance does discourage CRP because they're conflicting, right? CRP is the program that pays you when you're putting the land idle or do conservation effort versus the PRF is you have to graze or hay and you get the payment based on your insurance choice. We find that those are conflicting. So where do we go from here? In a sense that can we make crop insurance or risk management policies to promote more of the conservation practices or become more efficient? So I think OpenET and other innovations can do some of those, but we do need to think about this a little bit more carefully. Two areas I think there is a potential is the rate making and loss adjustment, even for the traditional yield and revenue protections. The other one is a new index insurance product that based on OpenET. So let me walk you through my thoughts there. So rate making and loss adjustment, that's been a challenging crop insurance space, and there's tons of work out there to get the actually sound premium rate to be established. Requires data. We do need to have a yield data. If you think about the farm, you do need a long time series to have actual, full distribution and get the premium rate right, because we're capturing the conditional value that under certain threshold, and it triggers the payouts. So that has been challenged. So there have been innovations in that space, but OpenET or remote sensing data, if you can go back in history, or if you are more spatially fine gridded, you can improve that. So we can get some rating innovation happen there. At the same time, we can also do potentially that rate by the practice. So here so far we're seeing just irrigated versus non-irrigated. Even that's hard, but if we want to do more, I guess a more specific or more choices in terms of practices, we do need some backup data or I guess alternative data than just yields. So OpenET, I think there's potential for that. And again, so I'm already in the second bullet point there. We do also need some innovation in statistical tools. Like this morning we saw that machine learning, random forest can contribute to have a better adjustment and extrapolation. I think we can do that same in a crop insurance rate making space. The other one is loss adjustment. Always it's been challenging. Adjusters comes in and have check the field and whether everything's done correctly. Again, OpenET or other remote sensing can help on that. Finally, index insurance. Again, I talked about rainfall index insurance, but there's a basis risk. The rainfall is not a great measure for yield, right? But OpenET might be. The problem is data coverage, statistical tools that need to be there to have a sound product. But another thing is we do need to think about how the producers will perceive. Like OpenET, some people, that's a straightforward idea, straightforward concept. For some folks, it's not. Because back in 2007 and 8, we did have a alternative product to the rainfall index insurance, which is vegetation index-based insurance. Take-up wasn't great. People haven't buying it. So that's why it disappeared. But again, so that's why we also need to think about the producer behaviors and responses. So with that, I think I'm run out of my time here, but I just want to close with some thoughts here. Again, there's a lot of applied research need to be done in this space, but again, certainly OpenET and other data sources combined with the sophisticated statistical tools can improve or understanding how the producers react and also designing better policy. So with that.
Okay, well, in true fashion for things that I've been in charge of before, we've gone long on time. And so we've got about 6 minutes left for questions. So I want to open it up to all of you and see if anybody has a burning question or remark they'd like to make based on what they just heard. If not, I'm happy to provide one and sort of punt it over to the panel. But anybody in the audience have a question?
The presentations we've heard today talked at least in some part about what we might call win-win solutions increasing water use and maintaining profitability, or in some cases maybe even increasing profitability. And that's a low-hanging fruit that everyone can get behind. I was wondering if the presenters have thought some about, at the very basic level, we could say that farmers convert water into cash profits. And have you thought about when the water becomes scarce enough that irrigation efficiency and better practices are not sufficing, and you're actually starting to cut into your profits, what things look like then?
I can start. So yeah, that's a great point, and so I did my PhD in Davis, and my advisor always said, in California, we're not running out of water, we're running out of cheap water. That's what I've been told, and I think that's right. So there's a discussion on, putting the seawater to make it, desalinated and or shipping water from somewhere else, right? But again, profit does matter, and in terms of like, how high the water price or the cost of using water need to be in terms of you're not doing the, corn. And also then the problem is, do we think the corn price will stay here, right? And also in that sense, some folks says RFS is the worst thing happened to the water because price is high and everybody's doing corn. So I think you're absolutely right. So again, the more research needs to be done in terms of getting what's the tipping point. We need to think about, and there's some work. I mean, the water, per square foot cost, and then so alfalfa versus almonds in California, and people have this discussion there too. Here, corn versus, I guess, hay or forage, or sorghum in that sense. So yeah, I mean, there's, but also that's a dynamic question, right? So do we think water price or the cost of water is going up constantly, or will reach some saturation point, and then other spaces, what do we think about the commodity price will be in the next 10, 20 years? So.
I can give you a quick, just a very quick anecdotal answer. So when developing this survey, I wanted to ask questions about what producers think the water actually is worth. What's the value of water? And it was about 2 weeks of discussions with my fellow scientists, some of whom were economists, saying, don't ask that question because we don't want to know the answer to that. When you start putting a price on water, that raises a lot of justice questions about who has access and how we're going to distribute the water. But we did ask the question, and we do have the values, but I'm not going to talk about it today because it's anecdotal and it wasn't rigorous, I guess. But it is descriptively very interesting.
I just like that too. You can have a conservation plan in place, and like 3 years ago, corn rocketed up to $8. That changed everybody's conservation program. My nephew's interest rates operating now, if you borrow $1 million, which isn't a lot these days, you went from borrowing money from 3% up to 8.5. Just imagine if your home loan did that. They're even thinking, boy, should we even be doing this anymore? Because the best thing that ever happened to us with corn was at between $4 and $4.50. A lot of guys won't say that, but the inputs were pretty level. They know, your phos, your nitrogen, but the best conservation plan can still be dismantled by high commodity prices.
And so then I guess I'll just build on that by saying, I think that what we're looking at a system-wide scale is then a different kind of marketization. Like, what is the system that we're making profitable? If it's just market-driven and it's just commodity crop-driven, then everything is going to be reactive. When these folks are managing the soil and water and energy resources that are critical to 40% of the protein production in the United States. And so if we are to actually extend, not just protect those communities, but actually extend, that's like a national security issue and also a feeding the world kind of issue, or feeding even just the United States in terms of protein. It's like, how do we actually make it so that people are thinking in the dry years and the wet years. We have actually data from farms and from research that show how in the drought years, people use less water. They pay more attention to how much water they're actually applying. And so there's got to be a way to make that ROI right front up and center so that even if there is $8 corn, people are still acting as if it's a drought year, because it's technically always a drought year in the high plains. There's always a limited amount of water. And, it's really normalizing that change so that it does become more profitable year in and year out. And people's idea of dumping the water on when the corn price is high no longer becomes a thing.
Thank you to all the panelists. I think we're at time, but if anybody has one more question, I'd love to let them ask it. Brady.
Question, and feel free to leave if people want to leave. We talked a lot about the high plains. The plains in general is no stranger to conservation concerns. Generally, there's plenty of them. On the vegetation side, they're saying that we're witnessing the death of a biome or an ecosystem just because it's changing so much. How do the social attitudes as it relates to water, how do they relate? How are they similar or different to other conservation concerns in the regions? And are there lessons learned or strategies that can be leveraged between them?
Yeah, so in some work we're doing right now on soil health, for example, and also biodiversity conservation, attitudes are remarkably similar. So there seems to be, now we haven't published this stuff, but there does seem to be some underlying sort of worldview or orientations toward farming or interacting with the natural world that translate across water, soil, animals, health, and so on. But that's sort of bad pun, unplowed territory for understanding the drivers of conservation no matter the outcome. That would be the short answer to that. But I'd be happy to follow up with you if you'd like. It's a very good question.
I just want to add one thing, or did I jump from it? Before y'all leave today, Amy mentioned something about the TAPS program, Technology Applied Performance Solutions. You don't have to be a producer to participate in that. Now, I've already challenged Rachel, I know she's in the audience here somewhere, to participate in it. Maurice, I would like, this would be pretty awesome even for next year when the next application conference is, but if you all want to participate in that, you can do the Kansas TAPS, the Nebraska, Oklahoma. It would be pretty awesome if and you don't got to be a farmer. If you would want to maybe participate in that and see how well you can do with your agronomic decisions.
I just wanted to follow up to that to say that we, as a group, have been talking a little bit about some other metrics that could be incorporated into things like TAPS. And, one idea that we had mostly related to water was recharge. You would need sort of bigger plot sizes for the competition, and that introduces some of the apples to oranges challenges that Amy spoke to. But, if we could design that, I think that'd be really cool, definitely in California, probably elsewhere as well. But this question of, maybe something related to biodiversity or to soil. I mean, there's other metrics that could be incorporated into competitions like that. And I think it'd be a really interesting thing to start to try and build that out and introduce those concepts into that type of competition and build some communities practice around those other goals that are also important. So, we'll really, really appreciate, again, a lot of these folks have traveled sort of far and wide to get here, as you all have. I hope this was an inspiring and very interesting session for you, as it was for me. Please, one more time, give these folks a round of applause and a thank you so much for making the trip. And I think now it's time for lunch, Rachel, is that right? Lunchtime. Enjoy.
Why do I keep going off the script, man?
I do too.
Huh?
You did fine. That was really good.
Yeah.
I'm glad that it was recorded. Because property insurance is so hard. It's so complicated. It's so complicated, and like some of it's like gambling.
It is.